Welcome, everyone, to another edition of the Sports Medicine Update. It's a weekly podcast by yours truly featuring the Honorable Dr. Chad Prodromos. Doctor, how are you?
Doing great, Jerry. How about you?
I'm doing fantastic. It's a heat wave that we are experiencing here in the Chicagoland area. I'm sure in other parts of the country and around the globe, they're all from one end of the spectrum to the other end of the spectrum. People are experiencing different levels of the weather, but here in Chicago, the Chicagoland area, 90-degree temperatures, heat index over 100, but you got the air conditioning going, you're feeling nice and cool, that's for sure.
Yep, absolutely.
So as far as the world of sports is concerned, Doctor, there's a lot of heating up going on in the National Football League. Of course, the NBA with the bubble down in Orlando. Baseball certainly is ready to kick things off with the start of the regular season. A week away, July 23rd, 24th, they're going to be opening up things. National Football League, there's some speculation going on there. And, of course, golf. Tiger Woods was playing out in Muirfield, Ohio this past weekend. And, of course, NASCAR and horse racing is going. So the normalcy as far as the sports world is concerned, Doctor, seems like we're inching closer and closer to that. Although numbers around the country has been spiking regarding coronavirus and COVID-19. But as far as the sports world is concerned, I think all the leagues can say they're doing the best they possibly can in trying to keep a grasp on this thing and keep it contained. Baseball. Interesting. The numbers that this past week regarding the testing, over 10,000 baseball players in a major league level have been tested with a mere 6%, actually 6 cases coming back positive, less than 1% regarding the positive testing for Major League Baseball. So they're looking really, really good, Doctor. What were your thoughts on the numbers that came out this past week?
Well, I tell you, I have mixed thoughts on it. I mean, first of all, so I think it's good, and it would be a very long discussion, and maybe not for this venue, but so here's the thing. I think the low number is a good thing.
Okay.
But if the number had been much higher, I think that'd be a good thing too, because let's say the number were 15%, which is kind of what it is in Sweden. Well, we know from some studies, recent study from the Karolinska Institute in Sweden, that the total immunity is twice that, T-cell immunity, cellular immunity. So what we test for is antibodies, but cellular immunity seems to be about twice that. Very good study came out a couple of weeks ago. It's all over the internet. So that would mean that there was a 30% immunity rate. Well, people talk about herd immunity sort of eradicating the virus, and if you get there. But the thing is, what people don't talk about is that if you get something less than full herd immunity is maybe 60 or 70%. But if you have 10, 20, 30%, and many people now think herd immunity is only in the 40s. We discussed this before. Anyway, so what that does is it bends the curve. So if 30% of the baseball players were immune, and happily, nobody's gotten really sick, that would mean that contagion among them would be greatly mitigated, so that if something did happen to get out there, the spread would be significantly less. The way it is now, it's good that people don't have it, but it also kind of means that the potential for maybe a little more rapid spread is there. So I don't know. I think it's good news, but like I said, if it were higher, I think that would be good news too.
Well, I think from the medical perspective, you're probably dead on. But again, from a layperson's perspective, or a ranking official, a front office person, whether it's a Major League Baseball, the NBA, NHL, or the National Football League, they want the numbers to be low, because if you get a high number, Doc, whether it's a 10%, 20%, 30%, it's as if you run a higher risk of these players or some players coming out on the bad side of this thing. And that's what the leagues are looking to avoid. They don't want, because when we look across the spectrum as far as, the general society, you got people who are asymptomatic, but you got people who, have passed away from it, unfortunately. And you have people who are on respirators. and we know the numbers that are escalating in parts of the country whether it's Arizona, California, Texas, or Florida. And so when you look at the league's perspective, they want the numbers low because God forbid, any of these players who have come down, with a positive test, that they're hospitalized or even worse. And of course, you don't want them to take it home to their families, whether they're going to be, in a bubble for 2-3 months or what have you. So from their perspective, they're happy that the numbers are really, really low, less than 1%. But I do understand.
Let me just say, I agree with everything you said, and I know they're happy, and I'm glad that they succeeded, and it shows that they're doing what they're doing well. The only point I disagree with is that if the number were higher of people that were already infected, it wouldn't increase the chances of rapid spread later. It would decrease the chances, because that would mean that there were fewer people who could get it and take it elsewhere. That's the only thing that concerns me a little bit, is that if you've got a large population where almost nobody's infected, the chances of it spreading more rapidly later are maybe a little higher. But hey, I think things are good, so I'm happy with them.
But again, when you look at it, in mainstream America, or the mainstream society, again, when you have refrigerator trucks being driven in particular areas of the country because of the bodies that are stacking up, how do you defend, that perspective? How do you defend that, that premise that, more is better, so to speak?
Because, you take New York, for example, where they exposed old people early, and they, didn't know, I guess. So they've got 32,000 deaths there. And Florida right now has 4 because they did protect old people early. And now they have cases, but the death rate is up some, but nowhere near what it was in New York at the time. And the idea is that if you get cases among young, healthy people, that you won't get the deaths. For example, school children. There's several studies that have shown, that's why in Europe, the kids are all back in school. There's a study in Wales, there's another one in the UK, and it's really interesting. They found that kids don't seem to spread this disease. They found there was a study that showed that in flu cases, 57%, I think, of the cases had a young person as the original nidus, and in COVID-19, it's single digits. So the idea is that kids don't seem to spread it almost ever. They did this study. They took 3 kids in Wales and followed all of their contacts who were infected a few months ago. 1,000 contacts. Nobody got it. There was another study, double digits kids. So the idea is that if you get the young, healthy people, if they get it, the death rate is less for COVID-19 than it is for the flu. And then you are getting all these immune people who won't spread it later. So that's the idea. Don't encourage it to spread because you can overwhelm hospitals. And I don't want to repeat what we talked about a couple of weeks ago, but you can control cases, mitigate deaths. And I think the deaths, even where it has spiked, are not spiking anywhere near what they did at these other places. So anyway.
Well, so Doc, let's move forward. And, again, baseball, we're basically a week away from the regular season, as we know, a 60-game schedule to take place starting on Saturday and Sunday of next week. And again, baseball is looking good. All the other sports or leagues are looking at baseball to kind of monitor how they progress. In particular, we talk about the National Football League. The training camp is supposed to get underway at the end of the month, July 31st. And of course, the talk now over the past week or 10 days has been, will there be a preseason? Now, we know that prior to COVID-19 and the pandemic, that there are negotiations on shortening preseason to 2 games and extending the regular season to 17 games. Now, currently during the COVID and coronavirus pandemic, the talk again is, do we just eliminate, or does the league eliminate preseason to try to protect these players and just get into the start of the regular season come September? What have you heard, and what are your thoughts regarding that?
So I followed this. I have maybe a little bit different point of view than what's been out there. So I have to tell you, maybe it's because I'm a physician and I take care of these kinds of people,
Mm-hmm.
but the thing that I care about more than anything, honestly, is just the health of these players. I mean, so there's three parties. There's players, there's owners, there's fans. And so, the players are the most important people to me, I think. The the fans, I'm a fan, but fans they can go, they can not go. They've got complete freedom to do what they want to do. I think the owners, one way or another, things are going to work out. So here's the thing that I think. The NFL, when it first started, was back in whatever it was, 1924 or something, was 12 games. Briefly went down to 10 during World War II, but it was 12 for a while, and then it went up to 14, I think, in 1960, and then eventually to 16, and now to 17. And they used to play, as you know, 6 preseason games. So it was 14 plus 6 or 16. I don't know if it was 16 plus 6, but anyway, so they're playing about 20 games. I think it's 14 plus 6 and then 16 plus 4, whatever. So here's the thing. Football, it's dangerous sport. And as people have gotten bigger and faster, it's gotten more dangerous, actually. I think what's been done to make it safer is great. But every game that you play is just another opportunity to get hurt. And so, people had talked about increasing it to 18 games. And it's just a lot of games. So what I think is this. It's interesting. Matt Nagy, I don't know if he started a trend, but he's a big proponent of it, although he might be having to backtrack, where he didn't, he famously didn't play Mitch Trubisky basically at all,
Right.
but he didn't play his people during the 4 preseason games. So here's what I think wouldn't be a bad thing. The problem look, if you could keep it 17 games and get rid of all the preseason games, I think that would be great, except for one thing. And that as you know, the league, the owners, everybody relies on revenue from that. Because you know how it goes. Fans are forced to buy these things. So the thing is, if you could get rid of those games, I think it'd be great. But you can't, I don't think, get rid of those games without decreasing revenue. And if you decrease revenue, then the players are going to have to take less money. I don't see how else you can do the math. And I don't think the players are going to want to take less money. I don't blame them. But I don't think you can get, maybe this year is an exception, but going forward, I don't think you can get rid of preseason games without decreasing revenue. So what does that mean? That means that these players who have short careers, and there's some of them, Patrick Mahomes makes all kinds of money, right? But most guys don't. I mean, they make good money, but so what I think is, if you get rid of preseason games and decrease revenue, then the players are making less money. But if you keep talking about next year, say, if you keep the preseason games, I think you could probably keep the revenue where it is. But, and here's kind of the interesting part, I think. But if the trend continues that the players just don't play in these games, like with the Bears, watching it last year, you're looking at the third string players, and you're those games really were about the back end of the roster, which can be kind of interesting, actually. So think about this. If you got 20 games in a year, 17 plus 3 or 21, 17 plus 4, let's just say. But the players, so you keep the preseason games, you keep the revenue the same, but you just don't play the frontline players in those games. Then those games are played mostly by people that aren't going to be playing later. So it's kind of good for them. They get to showcase their talents. They get to make a little money.
Right.
So the players get to make the same amount of money, but play fewer games. So, they're getting paid for not playing, which I think is good for them. And I think it's good for their bodies, basically, the preseason games. But if you get rid of them, then they're playing fewer games, which is good, but they're getting less money, which means they've ultimately got to play more games, on the back end. So, maybe instead of playing 4 years, they got to play a 5th year to get more games. So it increases their risk for the same money. What do you think?
Well, no. Well, they already just had the collective bargaining agreement, Doc, and so that they have reduced the number of preseason games, but they're also adding the game on the back end, plus increase the playoffs. So they found a way to balance. The players, they really don't get a game check, regular season game check, until the season gets underway. So they don't get that amount of revenue during those preseason games. So it's almost meaningless for those starters, i.e. you talk about a Tom Brady, or now Patrick Mahomes or those types. The preseason game, And you talked about it. You're right. It was at 6 games, way back when we were kids. And you do remember, training camp teams, the Bears, they would go 2-a-days. And management owners found that in doing that, you're you're wearing down your players because they're beating each other up in the heat like we're experiencing now, 90-degree temperatures, 2-a-days. They're getting hurt, they're dehydrated, they're collapsing, they're passing out, and by the time the regular season gets underway, some of those guys are already banged up, and within 4, 5, 6 games, you got guys on IR. So owners over the years say, wait a minute, if I'm investing money in this product, I'm not going to overextend them and have my guys beating each other up and not prepare for the regular season. Hence, we don't make the playoffs and we don't obtain our goal of getting to the championship and Super Bowl and winning. So that's when you start to factor in the 4 games of the preseason, right? Now you're down to 2 seasons in the pregame, and players, and Matt Nagy did agree and admit that he made a mistake in not playing Mitchell Trubisky last season, a lot of his starters during the preseason, because as we saw, the Bears weren't prepared for the regular season. So he did admit that he made a mistake, but a lot of players, coaches are saying, hey, wait a minute, I'm not going to play my guys for 4 games because it makes no sense. Now, you say if a 60-man roster, and you pretty much have 45 guys who are going to make the team because they're under contract or because of whatever the case may be. So the preseason games are designed to fill that role of another 10, maybe 12 players, and of course the practice squad players of another 8 to 10 players as well. So you don't necessarily need to play your starters, but you do need to get them football physically ready for the regular season. And teams that have done that wisely and precisely, we see longevity as far as the season is concerned and going to the playoffs and hence winning the Super Bowl. But the elimination of preseason games, it's on the docket as far as the two sides are concerned, the Players Association and the league itself. So the revenue that is generated, it does not correspond to the revenue of the regular season.
Yeah, but Jerry, those players, those game checks that they get when they play in games, they get, say you get $1 million a year, right?
Right.
If the preseason is eliminated, the owners make less money. So that $1 million check for that guy is going to be $800,000. That's what I'm saying, or $900,000.
They're putting it on the back end, meaning the playoffs, because they add more teams to the playoff. They add another week of playoffs to extend that toward the role.
Right, sure, but still in all,
so they're going to make that money on the back end.
They are, but still in all, at the end of the day, you'll have another round of playoffs, I recognize, another regular season game, I recognize, and the preseason is whatever it is. And what I'm saying is, say it's 3 games, if you get rid of those 3 games, even though they've got the back end, it's just less revenue because the total revenue is the sum of the preseason, the regular season, and the playoffs. So you get rid of those games at the front end, the total amount of revenue that the owners have is less, and they're not going to do that unless the players agree to take less money because there's just less.
I'm going to agree to disagree with you because if you look at 2 preseason home games for the Bears, okay, that stadium holds probably 62,000 to 67,000, give or take, right? Every home game that they have. For the preseason games, the Bears are probably going to get half of that fan base inside of that stadium over on the lakefront. So let's say they get 35,000 to 40,000 fans, and to me that's pushing it. But those are 2 preseason games that they're going to be under their ticket sales and their concession sales and their parking sales. Whereas on the back end, you make the playoffs, and the Bears are in the playoffs. They win the NFC, NFC North Division or whatever. Now you got 67,000 plus fans in that stadium. So your revenue is going up because of those ticket sales, plus the concessions and the parking. I do understand what you're saying, but that's not a difference as far as salaries for players are concerned, because
Sorry, so I understand what you're saying. You take away a preseason and put in a playoff, and maybe the net is higher. But all I'm saying is that those games, as you point out, they get ticket sales because they force people to buy tickets. Whether they come or not, they got to buy them. They got to pay for them. So they force people to buy tickets, and the people that come spend money, and then they get TV money for those things too. Right. So all I'm saying is you get rid of those games, and there's just less revenue. No matter what, all else equal, you get rid of revenue. And if you get rid of revenue, the owners will never agree to it unless the players agree to take less. And what I'm saying is, if I were a player, if I can keep those preseason games and I'm not playing, I'm getting paid for not playing, which is exactly what I want.
Well, they've cut a deal already. They cut a deal moving forward, and I think it's a 10-year deal that's put into place. And some of the current players, there were a lot of veteran players who were upset with the deal, Doc, because they told the younger guys, and I don't have the exact numbers. I don't know if it was 57 to 43 or something, but the number, they weren't that far off, to be honest with you. But the owners prevailed, and some of the veteran players were frowning and saying, it's a bad move when you talk about longevity over a 10-year span, because the numbers, as you well know, they may look good today in 2020, but in 2030, for the guy who's coming up through the ranks, they're going to look back on it and say this was a very, very bad deal that was.
And I agree. Was I think those players are right, because I think that you get so basically, what is it, 3 preseason games? Is that what the deal is going forward for next year if we get back to normal?
They increased down to 2 as opposed to 4. Yeah.
Well, I mean, they increased regular season from 16 to 17.
Right.
I'm not sure if the preseason goes from 4 to 3. I think
3,
it does.
I believe it's 3, yeah.
All right. So whatever it is, let's just say it's 17 and 3. So I agree with those players, because that extra game they've got to play, and I know the whole Matt Nagy thing. So Matt Nagy's had to backtrack because the season was, they underperformed last year. So he's had to say, I made a mistake. But as you pointed out, even though he's having to backtrack, I think a lot of the other coaches are not. I think a lot of the other coaches are saying, hey, Matt Nagy had kind of, had kind of a good thing. And so, but either way, veteran players, if you're 16 regular season, 4 preseason, and I think those players can exert pressure too. I think they can just say, hey, I'm just not really interested in doing this. And I think they can finesse it so that their total stress on their bodies is less. I mean, even the extra playoff thing, I guess that's okay because it's the playoffs and you're making money. But I just think those preseason games are an opportunity for them to contribute to the revenue pot. And so I mean, the net thing is that the good players, I mean, David Montgomery last year, I don't know if he played hardly at all. And he probably won't play hardly at all in the preseason. Why should he, right? So he could do 16 and 4, playing 16, 4 sit out pretty much. But now he's got to play 17. And that's just one more game, guys like him. And I think that's bad for him. I think it's bad for these players. Is it the end of the world? No. But, it's creeping, right? It's gone from 12 to 14 to 16 to 17. And they have no choice but to play. And I understand the deal is done. But I'm just saying that, I think that preseason with back of the roster guys is like a separate, it's like a separate team, separate season, market it that way and let these guys save their bodies.
No, I agree with you. And that's the whole reason why they negotiate to try to figure out a happy medium. And that's the beauty of, the business side of athletics on a level, because you're looking out for the best interest of the player, the product, but you're also looking at the best interest of the sport, of the game itself. And a lot of fans, you talked about the 3 components, owners, players, and fans. Fans have been complaining over the past few years and actually kind of leaving the game because of the poor play, whether it's poor tackling, whether it's poor play calling, or injuries that contributed to, the downside of the sport. That's one reason one side would agree that preseason is very important. Now, keep in mind, these players don't want to play 4 preseason games. And the rule of thumb is to get in the 3rd preseason game so that you can get as close as live game action that you possibly can prior to the start of the regular season. Most teams and most players, they seem to play themselves into shape between week 1 and week 5. From week 6 to week 9, maybe 10, is when these teams really start to get their groove. By week 11, they're in position to position themselves for a playoff push. But typically, the first 4 games of the regular season, you can, and some players will admit to it, other players will disagree. But a lot of them, it appears that they are playing themselves into football shape. Because again, lifting weights and running sprints or whatever is one thing, but to actually get your body accustomed to getting physically hit and hitting the ground and jumping up, and that's called football shape. And they don't want to necessarily get it during the preseason, i.e. they may get hurt. But those first 4 games during the regular season is when they start to get themselves into that physical conditioning as far as their bodies are concerned for the pounding, the continuous pounding and the grinding. So there will be sides that say, we still need the preseason games to get acclimated to the regular season. But there are others that say, hey, you know what? I get in condition during week 1. I don't want to go through the preseason. As far as Matt Nagy is concerned, he admitted, yes, he made a mistake by not playing Mitchell Trubisky and some of his other starters. I believe other coaches around the league and players themselves, our own Quentin Demps, who was on the show, said, a 10-year player in the National Football League, he said, you need the preseason. You need it for the reasons I just mentioned. You just got to get ready for the regular season. So I can guarantee you there are a few coaches around the league that disagree with Matt Nagy's approach, but we're happy that the Bears did that because that set them a game or 2 behind the pendulum, so to speak, in preparation for the regular season. But I do see where I see your reasoning and your analogy behind it from an economic standpoint. But
I just think these guys, I just think they get beaten up too much. And what you said, very true. You don't beat them up as much in the preseason, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah,
I just think I just think you get to a point where injuries get to be inevitable if these guys play too much.
No, we also have to keep in mind the life expectancy of a professional football player. It's gone from 3.5 years to 2.5 years because
Is that right? I didn't know that. Wow, how interesting.
Wear and tear.
Yeah.
Martellus Bennett, former Bears tight end, under the Trestman era, he got fined and suspended for slamming Kyle Fuller down in his rookie year doing training camp at Bourbonnais. I'm dating myself here. Bourbonnais.
Well, she didn't say Rensselaer, but
yeah. but Martellus Bennett, he told the media, he said, hey, listen, he goes, I'm trying to get my body in the football shape. I'm trying to get mentally and physically ready. He said, because this is a violent sport. And he goes, the guys on the other teams, on the other side of the football, he said, they're trying to kill me. This is what he addressed the media. He goes, they're trying to kill me. So I have to get my body physically ready for this grind. It's a very violent sport, but I have to get mentally ready for it. And that's the mentality of these players when they approach this game at this level, because it's survival of the fittest, so to speak. And from a fan's perspective, they're not happy because the league is interfering too much in trying to police everything that's going on, including when we talk about COVID and protecting the players. It doesn't make sense, and we talked about this on the previous podcast. Anybody miss it, they can certainly go to YouTube, Facebook, and just Google the Sports Medicine update. But we talked about 3 hours of grinding and pounding and sweating and spitting and blood, all of this going on. But then at the end of the game, 2 players can't exchange jerseys because it increased the risk of COVID. That makes no sense to the fan. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I wonder if they're gonna. I mentioned last week, I kind of expect them to walk that back, but at least I haven't seen anything about it.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything else. But I like what you said, and who knows, maybe the next time the collective bargaining agreement comes up, that this will be put on the table. But right now, players are looking to uh, it's just like the generation that we're living in, the society that we're living in now. It's immediate gratification. They want it now, and these players in the National Football League, they wanted the money now, not thinking about the longevity 10 years down the road, how that's going to affect their fellow man, their fellow players coming up through the ranks, right? High school ranks or collegiate ranks, and it's kind of disappointing. And sometimes I think you need to listen to, the veterans who've been there, and of course the veteran players who are making, big money. They're making big money for a reason, and they're veterans in this game and in this league for a reason. And I think as a union, some of those younger players who are probably not making as much money should sit back and listen. And it's interesting you talk about that. J.J. Watt, the Houston Texans, said, the National Football League right now, we're not really comfortable with where things stand as far as resuming the season or getting the season underway, if there's going to be preseason games or if we're going to jump right into the regular season. And he's got a lot of support from some current players. Over 100 players were on a Zoom call this past week, and that was one of the major points addressed during their conversation, whether or not the National Football League will have preseason games, or are they just going to get right into it in September? Your thoughts on that?
No, I agree with you. I mean, I think for right now, probably less is more. And I think things are going to get better on multiple fronts with this virus. I mean, the vaccine news from this last week were stunning. The one vaccine, I can't think of where it's from. There was the second one from Oxford. And so, and we don't know. We don't know if we're going to get a good vaccine. But preliminarily, it looks really good. Pretty soon, perhaps, maybe end of the year. And then in the treatment front too, there's remdesivir is working, hydroxychloroquine. There's evidence that it works. There's so many drugs in the pipeline, and a lot of them. There's actually a cholesterol drug that looks good. There's a lot of drugs. So I think that on the treatment end and on the vaccine end, that we're going to be doing. I think we already are doing a lot better. So, you can argue, what's the rush to get back to everything right now, because pretty soon, certainly next year and maybe later this year, we're going to be in good shape.
Well, I hope we're going to be in good shape. And Doc, we're running short on time, but I have to show you. This is my weekend version of the Chicago Daily Herald. I like to talk about the local newspaper here in the Chicagoland area, and the article, Football Foreboding. The Chicagoland Youth League cancels their fall season, Doc. Yeah. And this thing has been going on for over 30-something years, I believe. Yeah. And it's unfortunate. And we're talking, this is like Pop Warner football. So we're talking about kids who are preparing for, high school and, of course, moving on to college. But Pop Warner football around the Chicagoland area has been canceled. And it's sending shockwaves across the sports world, because locally we're saying now, hey, wait a minute, does this mean high school football is going to be canceled? We're seeing what happened, what's transpiring in the collegiate levels, where the Ivy League said we're not playing football at all. The Big Ten Conference said we're just going to concentrate on the conference games. And we know that the Pac-10, the ACC, the SEC are looking at things as well. But when you see youth football like this being canceled because of the scare of the pandemic, what does this look like for high school sports locally and around the nation from your perspective?
Well, this might be too long a discussion for a couple of minutes, but sure. I think the kids need to be back in school. American Academy of Pediatrics thinks kids have to be in school. Every physician I know thinks kids have to be back in school. So I guess from my perspective, I think get the kids in school, and if maybe canceling the sports makes, and not everybody feels as I do, maybe the people who are more worried about it think, well, all right, we'll let them be back in school, but let's cancel the sports because it increases the risk, which it probably does, of contagion, depending on what you think about that. So as important as it is, to me, right now, I just want to see them be in the classroom. And if sports makes people nervous and they don't do it, right now, it not as big a deal to me.
So you don't think it's a contradiction? We're gonna wipe out sports because of the pandemic, but it's okay to get in the classroom and study.
So here's the thing, Jerry. The more contact there is, the more contagion there is. Right. And sort of the idea and the whole herd immunity idea is that you don't just tell everybody go out in a big stadium and forget social distancing. The idea is that be careful where you can, but take care of the old and sick people and prioritize. So do I think it's a contradiction? Not really, because I think that the more time you spend together, the higher the risk. And for people who are worried about it, I'm not so much, because all the data on kids I think is good. But I don't know. I think that it's a reasonable compromise to make, I guess is what I'm saying, because there's a lot of polarization on this, to people that say, all right, let's just focus on getting those kids in school. Let's focus on protecting at-risk teachers, and then if we're not doing sports, if that makes people more comfortable, I don't think it's a contradiction. I think it'd probably be okay, but I think that the people who don't feel that it's safe could make the argument, well, school is bad enough, and now you're going to put sports on top of that. Does that increase the risk of contagion? It does. So, you can argue that the contagion in these kids doesn't really much matter, right, but not everybody thinks that. So if you think it does matter, then tell those people, say, look, I know you're concerned, and I understand why you're concerned, but let's just do the school thing, take our risks there. And for the other stuff, it's terrible. Choirs, right? Choirs, bands and all that. There's thoughts about choirs being bad places, for obvious reasons and all that. So as far as I'm concerned, I just don't want a generation of kids to fall behind, and especially poor kids, right? Because this hits poor kids a heck of a lot worse. So I just want those kids in school. And if you sacrifice some of this to assuage fears of people, I think it's bad. But, I'd rather do without high school football for a semester or a year than school.
Right. No, I hear you, Doctor. And hopefully the model that's being implemented and used as far as the sports world is concerned, whether it's the bubble down in Orlando or Major League Baseball isolating these. I don't know if you heard this, but it came across earlier today when the Canadian government told Toronto, the Blue Jays, the baseball team, you're not playing any sports here. It's not happening. No.
Oh, I didn't hear that.
This has thrown a monkey wrench in, baseball's comeback, because what happens to the Toronto Blue Jays? Do they not get a chance to participate in the 60-game shortened season?
Wow.
They travel here to the States and they're put up their house someplace because the government in Canada will not allow them to play sports up in there. That's unbelievable. It's phenomenal. And we're going to be learning more about that decision that came down. But I know that, local governments and organizations, around this country are keeping an eye on what happens with sports. And again, the bubble for the NBA, Major League Baseball, what's going on there. Of course, football is keeping an eye on things. National Hockey League are looking to try to get back, but there's still people who are against, players who are against the return of it. So we're at a very crucial stage as far as the sports world is concerned, our country is concerned, and this world is concerned. And we don't know the answers. And we're going one step at a time. And one part, it may be the right answer. Another part of the country, it may not be the right answer. But we got to go about it smart, safe, and careful, and hope that we get past this thing. But Doctor, it's always a pleasure. If anyone wants to get in contact with you, they want to get a hold of you, how do they find you?
So if they call our office, it's 847-699-6810. You can email. And if listeners, viewers have questions to ortho, O-R-T-H-O, at ISMOC. It's Illinois Sports Medicine and Orthopedic Centers, but ortho at ismoc.net. And we're going to start doing some questions here in the near future. We'll do some on the air, answer what we can.
We certainly will. Dr. Chad Prodromos, Sports Medicine Update, the weekly podcast. It's a pleasure. Stay safe, Doc, and we'll talk with you next week.
Great. Thanks, Jerry.